bit into the life of Dr. Frank Garlock and whetting your appetite, the listener's appetite for his book. He's written on autobiography, and we're going to give a bit of a sample and a bit of a taste over these next few episodes. And I've been hearing a bit here and there, even as we're at breakfast this morning. I've got to hear treated to different aspects of his life story, so excited for the listeners to enjoy that. And what part are we looking at today?
We're looking at a man that was very interesting, and that money that he made back in the 1800s was put me through college when I was at Bob Jones University as a student.
Great.
Many years ago, of course.
Yeah, it's been a while.
But it's fascinating to know about this man. His name was Charles Lee Cook. And there was an article about him in the American magazine in April 1920.
Wow.
That's quite a while ago.
Yes.
And it printed this unusual story, and it's called A Genius Who Never Walked a Step. He was a genius, and he was known for his humility and his perseverance and warmth. He was a cripple who has never been able to walk a step in all of his life.
Yeah.
Can you imagine that?
No.
Some of America's proudest warships could not have held their heights. I'm quoting from the article that was in that American magazine.
Okay.
It said some of America's proudest warships could not quite hold their heads quite so high had this same cripple solved the problem which set up danger of boiler explosions.
Oh, wow.
He invented a device that eliminated that problem.
Oh.
Early high-rise apartment buildings could not be made livable because without one of his inventions that he made. Now, what's so interesting about him, that when he was age 1, he developed a disease of the muscles, just as a baby. At age 4, he was wheeled to and from school because he couldn't do anything. He had no power in his feet, nothing, no strength in his hands. At age 7, he was taken out of school because his parents thought he would not live very long.
Oh.
By the way, they were never any. They did not. They just discouraged him, and thought he was just child's play what he was doing. But at age 8, he built a steam engine made from a cartridge shell, a baking powder can, and parts of a kerosene lamp.
Oh, wow.
And most of the parts, he lived up in Louisville, Kentucky, and they were on a farm evidently, and the parts came out of the barn that he found.
Yeah.
When he was age 12, he constructed a miniature towboat 20 inches long and run by steam. It was a duplicate of the famous Mississippi River towboat Ajax. Then he built a steam fire engine that contained 1,000 pieces. It was 8 inches high and it weighed 7 pounds, but it could shoot water at least 50 feet.
Wow.
It was made from pieces of lamp burners, steel hairpins, knitting needles, and brass tubing from an old gas jet. As a teenager, and I guess this is most interesting, as a teenager, the train engines at that time lost a lot of steam at each stroke of the piston. He developed a packing material, got his helper to take him to the railroad station in the middle of the night, installed it, and it worked.
Oh, wow.
By the way, it went 175,000 miles without having to be fixed.
That's great.
His hands, it's so interesting to know about his hands. They were too weak to hold any tools, so he constructed his own lathe, a little contraption, that enabled him to work 17 hours a day for 12 years before he established his small factory.
Wow.
He did all this in spite of discouragement from his parents and others who thought he would never amount to anything. So what I want to do, what I'd like you to do, Dr. Willingham, is to give some of the quotes this man made. He had friends everywhere, senators, congressmen. I think Henry Ford counseled with him. Edison counseled with him because he could think very clearly, but just couldn't do anything for himself. So here is what he said.
Yes. Adversity is a spur. What may seem the harshness of providence, and by providence he means God, what may seem the harshness of providence is often just what is needed to make man fit to face the steel of existence. It is true of man, as it is of nations, that they thrive and wax strong on hardship, and that they wane on ease and self-satisfaction. He went on to say, I succeeded in overcoming present difficulties just as I have succeeded in overcoming other difficulties since. Not just by always being willing to work harder than most people, but also by seeking to distinguish between trifles and big things. Success cannot be defined, it can only be described. Self-pity is fatal to success. Some of those who have started life with the worst handicaps have accomplished the most. Robert Louis Stevenson gave the world some of his finest books while lying in bed at night nigh unto death with tuberculosis, so weak that he could not hold a pen. I have always scorned to accept sympathy over being a cripple. I would accept no favor and negotiate no business with any person whose intention was to give it to me out of pity for my physical misfortune. Laziness is perhaps the most common cause of failure. I often hear people say, well, if I were a cripple like that man, I believe I would just commit suicide. I can answer them with equal feeling and more conviction that if Providence had given me their strength and health, and I had accomplished no more than they, there would not have been any doubt about my decision to take their suggestion. Wow.
That is so fascinating. A man who was a cripple could never do anything with his body, but he still used his mind and worked hard and ended up owning several factories, 3 factories. In fact, I called the factory up in Louisville just several years ago, probably 5 years ago now, and talked to the man who's the president. They still employ 500 people at that factory.
Great.
And what was so interesting to me, of course, with my name being Garlock, that the first thing he said, your name is Garlock? I said, yes. He said, our biggest competitor is the Garlock Company, because they also make packing. But that is so interesting to me. This man also gave away a large part of his income. And his nurse, Emma Cook, was her name, who became his wife, continued by paying my way through my college education as a favor to my grandmother with money Mr. Cook made even before I was born.
As you got to Bob Jones, there was an interesting encounter that you had, because where were you heading until, was it 2 weeks before Bob Jones? You were going somewhere else to college.
I was going to West Point. I had an appointment. I had waited too late to get my appointment. You have to get it from a senator to go to West Point.
Yeah.
And so I applied for it, and I got the appointment. And so I was waiting around that year, and it was going to go in the fall of 1949, and that's when I heard about Bob Jones through Elmer Piper. If people know John Piper now, this was his uncle who told me about Bob Jones University, and that's how I got to Bob Jones University 2 weeks after I heard about the school. And so arriving in Greenville on 1949 and registering at the registration desk in the library, I walked to the table where there was a man sitting and began to explain my situation to him.
Good morning, young man. We're glad to have you here as a new student. What is your name?
Look, I don't know how long I'm going to be here. You see, I don't have any money. I need a job in order to stay here. What can I do, or what job can you give me?
Well, young man, I don't need to know your problems. I need to know your name. What is your name?
Sir, I just told you. I don't know how long I can stay here. I have an appointment to West Point in the fall. That won't cost me anything. For here, I don't have any money.
Look, son, Stop talking. Just tell me your name.
Okay, it's Frank Garlock.
Frank Garlock. Okay, let's see. It says right here on the register that your bill is already paid for the first month.
Look, I already told you my name is Frank Garlock.
Unless you've changed your name, it says your bill's paid for the first month.
I thought they'd made a mistake and would send me a note at some point saying that I must come in and pay my bill. In fact, for the 3.5 years I stayed at BJU, including one session in the summer school, the answer was always the same.
Your bill is already paid for this month. Never ahead, always on time.
That's the way God got me through school.
Yeah.
By something that a man made in the 1800s, because he was a cripple, but he made my grandmother through God's leading. And that's interesting. My grandfather had cancer. They thought it was heart trouble back then. Sent him to Florida. That's where she met the nurse who became the cripple man's nurse. She ended up marrying him. And then when he passed away, before I was born, she took some of that money that he had made and paid my way through Bob Jones University 1 month at a time.
Great.
How the Lord works things. And I think that's going to be heaven.
Oh, yes.
Heaven's going to be rejoicing. I mean, you read in Ephesians, I've been studying Ephesians chapter 4, where it talks about our being all a part of the family of God. In heaven and on earth, it says that. We're all part of the family of God.
Yes.
And I think God's going to let us go back and review some of those things that he was doing for us. He said, you weren't aware of it, but I was working for you all the time.
Yes.
All you had to do was trust me.
Yes, good.
So that's what's so interesting. And if you want to get the whole story, of course, it's in my autobiography, I Being the Way the Lord Led Me. But this gives you an idea of some of the things that have influenced my life indirectly as I gave my life to God.
Good. Yeah, and to get a copy of that book, there are links in the description of this podcast video.
Yes,
Thank you.